everybody out there in YouTube land. How you doing tonight? It's your buddy Philtastic here, and welcome to another episode of 7-Minute Stories, the longest 7 minutes on the internet. We are still waiting for our guest, but we've got a great one lined up for you. My buddy and your buddy, Joe from Anachronic Comics. But before we get into that, let's see who's here with us today. I see Madam Blaster. You got to tell Master to get you some of that popcorn. Come on. Psychedelic, how you doing, Paul? I had coffee with Psychedelic this morning. Matt Woods, of course. Oh, everybody make sure you have your drink ready for Mr. Matt Woods. Let's see who else. No costume this year. Oh, Master is here. Master, Madam needs some popcorn. I don't know if that's her little cue to get you on it, but get it before our guest pops in here. Oh, wait. Master, you're going to have to run. I think that our guest has arrived. Let me go ahead and bring him in on the stream.
Yeah, it's Bruno. Bruno's here.
Whoa. Bruno,
Hey, you're
I
lucky
thought I was
man.
talking to
You're
Joe.
lucky man. Bruno's here. That Joe is not around, so don't worry about him.
Oh, but we were all really looking forward to talking to him tonight.
Everybody says that, but I'm the brains behind the shows. He gets out there, he shows his pretty face, does all that type of stuff. I'm the one writing the stuff, taking the videos. I'm sweating. So when he said that he had somebody to talk about comics and things like that, I said I could do it. He said, no, I'm going to do it because they want me. But then what happens? He decides to go down to Midtown Comics for a signing or something like that. He's not home yet. That's just the way it goes, So you got me. You're lucky. That's all I got to say. That's all I think we are.
Yeah, no, I think we're very lucky. We're very thankful that you're here, Bruno. So, okay, I guess we're going to do 7 minutes with Bruno today.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing to do, That's the thing to do. If you want to do 7 minutes with somebody, you do it with me. But anyway, that's the...
Oh, what's that?
Don't worry about it.
Is that banging? Did you order a pizza or something?
I think I got to go open the door. Phil. Okay?
Okay.
I'll be right back.
I didn't start the timer yet. You're good. I don't know what's going on there. Jeez, it's an aggressive pizza guy. Jeez, what's going on?
Bruno, you locked the damn door. You weren't here. I got to do this stuff for you. No, you didn't have to do that. Don't do that again, Stop.
I'm turning my head like I can see around.
Okay, don't worry about it. I won't do it again. Jeez. Oh, sorry,
Joe.
Phil.
No. Oof.
Phil, I mean, I don't even know how to change my name on this thing now. He's got the damn Bruno thing on there. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can change it back here now. Oh, geez. Edit name. That's it. Yeah, okay. Bruno is gone. Let's do Joe. How's that?
I think that's perfect.
I think that works.
There we go. Oof. I'm so glad. I thought I got my schedule mixed up.
That Bruno, he's a character. He decides he wants to take over everything. I had to suppress him a bit. I stopped buying those mystery boxes for him because it's going to be a pain in the neck. Always wants to be on. Then he wanted to be my co-host. All this type of stuff like that. Matt Woods. Who's the lawyer here, Matt Woods? Huh? Who's the lawyer here? Anyway, so that's kind of fun. I mean, people like Bruno. Even Pretty Fly wrote that skit for him on our DC Watch thing. And so forth.
And I got to tell you, I'm sorry, I got to tell you, that show was great. Pretty Fly knocked it out of the park with that opening.
Really?
I just watched it like 3 times just for the opening. It was a great discussion, but that opening was just a home run.
Well, I tell you something. I mean, he is really good at that. But as we mentioned in the after show, we recorded all that like over a month ago. And I kept telling him it's going to get stale. Something's going to happen. And so then we finally scheduled it. And just before it's scheduled, this whole thing with Superman came out and all of that. So it was still okay.
Yeah.
But I said, if we only had gotten this out like 2 weeks before or something like that, it would have been good.
I think it works fine. You're still good. And like I said, it was a great show. I'm ready for the next installment.
Yeah. So he's already got all these thoughts up and stuff like that. So I'm just kind of the vehicle and I go along for the ride. We talk it up between Dave, myself, and Pretty Fly, figure out what we want to do. but Pretty Fly's the director, producer, whatever else. I do some of the writing, outlining, and then we just wing it.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's good. So
So
what's the show about? I think it's 7 minutes. I'm a
7
lawyer.
minutes.
I can't talk for just 7 minutes. Come on.
That's
You got
the
to double
challenge.
it up for me.
That's
No.
the challenge. But you'd be surprised. I think the 7 minutes lets you really kind of focus on, at least in my opinion, what's important. I mean, look, I'll be honest with you. I'm surprised we got Matt in on 7 minutes. So yeah, we're going to open it up. You're going to tell your story in 7 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to the chat. I know people definitely going to have questions ready for you, and I'm really interested. I'm really psyched for this because without getting too far into it, I mean, everything I've seen online so far from your collection, wow. So I'm really looking forward to this here.
Okay, now I have to tell you that, being the professional that I am, I could certainly speak within 7 minutes and probably less if I have to. So,
well, that sounds like a challenge. Well, let's go ahead and start the timer. And I'll, of course, be awkwardly holding this up just so you're aware of the time. And start.
Okay. Well, my journey in comics. I really don't remember the first comic book that I had, but what I do remember was The Adventures of Superman with George Reeves and the rest of the people on TV. Now, it was on between 1952 and 58. I was born in 51, so I didn't see the originals, but they were on in repeats consistently. So that was one of my favorite shows. Like other kids, I put the towel around my neck and, jumped off of stuff and made believe that I was Superman and all of this. So at some point in time, and as I recall, I think my first comic book was around 1959 or 1960. I discovered comic books. And the real part of it has to do with my best friend, John, who I'm still hoping to get on the show at some point in time. John was, and I don't know if he still is, though he's still involved with the movies and stuff and knows a lot about the stuff. But John, before there was Comixology or anything like that, John was the encyclopedia of comic books. John was the guy who talked to me about comic books, knew what they were about. He was the one where we used to, there were 10 cents and then 12 cents in the day. So we used to pool our money because if we got $1, we used to be able to buy between the two of us 20 comic books. Think about that. $1, $2, 20 comic books. And what we do is we'd go every month and we'd buy maybe not the 10 for the dollar, but we'd buy 6, 7, or 8. And we lived down in the West Village, and we used to go down and sit down on my stoop mostly. And we'd sit down there with the comic books and we'd read them, and we'd trade them off and stuff like that. And he was the one, he kind of knew when the new comic books were coming out. I don't really know how he figured that stuff out. But I remember waiting with him. He said, the new Batman annual is coming out this Wednesday. And we go ahead and we put it down, go down to the store, sit on the curb waiting for the truck to come because it came with the newspapers and all of that. And, buy the comic book. Matter of fact, I saw him. His son just got married a couple of weeks ago. And I saw him and he started criticizing me because when I did the Comics My Mom Let Me Keep episode 1, which was The Flash, I had indicated that I had the Flash of Two Worlds, but I couldn't remember where I got it. It probably belonged to a friend of mine. And he reminded me that it was his book that he had given to me. So a lot of the books that I have to thank John for because he, from the trades or giving stuff to me, that was it. So as went along, I really, really got into the Justice League. And when they first started the Justice Society and Justice League crossovers, I was sold. I actually subscribed to it. I would get them folded, with the creased, envelopes or brown envelopes that were there. And I couldn't wait. Justice League came out 8 times a year. In those days, either the comic books were bi-monthly, 8 times a year, or monthly. Justice League was 8 times a year. So it was on for 2 months, off for 1. And I think it was during the summertime, if I remember correctly, the 2 issues that came together were the JLA, JSA thing. And I just loved those things. Along those lines, I kind of got into comics myself, and that's when I discovered Alter Ego and Batmania, 2 fanzines. I mean, there was no internet then. And that's when if you watched my Roy Thomas thing that I did with Matt Woods, that's when I wrote to Roy Thomas, got an answer from his mom, and and it was such a great time to be able to show him these two things that I had back from 1960s and have him sign it and talk to him about that. So Alter Ego is where I really discovered more about the JSA and the characters from the golden age of comic books. Then the annuals came out. It was 25 cents. I can't even tell how much time is there. You can put it down. Don't worry about it.
Oh,
Just let me
good.
know when it's over. So the annuals were really big because we got to see so many different comics, characters and so forth that I didn't know anything about it. So it grew and grew and grew. And then when I got into about the first year of college, I kind of put it aside. And then around 2007, 2008, I was involved heavily with the Boy Scouts. And the Boy Scout shop in those days was in the Empire State Building on the 4th floor. And so I went there to buy some stuff because I worked in Manhattan. So I went to the Empire State Building to buy some stuff for the troop or for my son or what have you. And then when I came downstairs, I saw across the street was a comic book shop. And I said, gee, it's kind of interesting. So I walked across the street and I didn't buy right away. But the next few times when I went to the Boy Scout shop, I went back in there and I started looking at some things like, I saw like the All-Star Superman and a few other things that were there. And I just kind of got interested again. And I then did a couple of things. I went ahead and I got Justice League again. So I started buying Justice League. I also then, because I was a big Marvel fan in the 60s. I mean, you could see it from some of the books I've been showing. And so I said, oh, this is great. So I started picking up Spider-Man again, which I enjoyed. Justice League I enjoyed Spider-Man. I loved the Avengers in the old days. I was a fan of the X-Men, but, more the Avengers. I picked up the Avengers books and I didn't know what the heck was going on. I mean, I didn't enjoy them at all. So I didn't buy them. X-Men, same thing. It was too complicated for me. So I started off again back in the early 2000s, basically with Justice League and Spider-Man. Then, just to bring it to kind of the end of the 7 minutes here, around maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, whatever it happened to be, I learned about the fact that you can clean comics, press them, and I started looking for stuff like that. And that's when I found Reggie, And then through Reggie, the rest of the group, including you and some of the people that are in the chat, and the channel started because I was in Cape Cod and I'd gotten so much mail, had a bunch of boxes of comic books that I had ordered. And I jokingly said to some people on Instagram, maybe I should start my own channel. And I was encouraged by Tina, by Matt Woods, and some other people to go ahead and do it. And so I did. And basically that's the story.
Wow, you are literally just a hair under the 7 minutes. I'm surprised.
Remember, I had to argue cases, and the judges used to put certain time frames on it, right?
Oh, you got a cheat clock too?
Yeah, I was clocking it too. So they used to put certain time frames on things, and you couldn't go over. All right, and you wanted to try to finish with maybe a couple of minutes left over if you could. So,
wow,
that's it.
You got to 4 minutes. And then you start going, well, then I went to college and it's like, oh my God, there's no way we're just going to make that up in 3 minutes. But wow.
There's a big gap there. So
I was taking some notes. I hope I didn't distract you when I was doing that.
No, the clock was distracting me.
You know what? That's why, let me tell you something. As you know, I work off my phone. So unfortunately, StreamYard, that clock too. StreamYard doesn't let you do any like fancy graphics or screen sharing if you're on a phone.
Right.
So I went on Amazon and I was purposely looking for the most annoying ticking sound I can. And this was the winner. And it's been working out for now. One thing I wanted to point out, you start bringing into you and your friend got into it. So it's almost like you had your own little community before this kind of bigger online comic book community even existed. I really found that interesting.
Yeah, well, John and I were really kind of the main cohorts. There were some other people that kind of were involved a little bit, but John and I were really, how could I put this? They didn't jump in feet first like we did. I mean, we were really into the comic books and the stories Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, all that type of stuff. We were very much into it. We discussed the stories. We did all that type of stuff. Others were kind of tangential. There were some other people involved too. But basically, it was he and I were really the two that were like this and that did all this type of stuff.
Yeah, you were the main enthusiasts, and they were kind of along for the ride.
Right.
Now, you said that your friend John was involved with movies. Is that with production, or he just had a knowledge of it?
No, he just had this. I don't know because, well, I do know probably. He just knew when the comic books were coming out, and he had this retention of things that I didn't have. I think I developed it a little bit as I went along, but he just knew things, and I would say something. So he'd say, "No, this is what happened," whatever else. And in retrospect, when I thought about, at that time, I didn't understand how he knew, like when the new comic was coming out and so forth. But then I realized much later, I think I was in my 40s or 50s, we were talking, his uncle owned a newspaper stand on 7th Avenue, where Sheridan Square is. If anybody was ever in New York City, you've got Christopher Street, you've got Fort Street, you've got 7th Avenue there, you got Waverly Place on the other side. It's like a conglomerate place. Sheridan Square has a big statue of General Sheridan, there. And we used to buy our newspapers from his uncle, and so forth. And so I recognized at that point in time that that's probably how he knew when the new comic books were coming out. Although his uncle did not carry the comic books, he probably had some insight as to when the new things came out, told John about it. And so we'd be there waiting for the comic books that we wanted if it was something important, rather than us just going to one of the stores that we frequented to buy the new comic
Well, that's
books.
good. You had the hookup.
That's right.
He was previews before previews.
Right. I guess so.
Did your limited budget influence what you bought?
Well, you have to remember, back in those days, if it was 10 cents, right? So you can get 10 comic books. Actually, when it went to 12 cents, and I've told this story before, and John and I were reminiscing about this at his son's wedding. When it went to 12 cents, we were all like PO'd about it, because now we can only buy whatever it was, 7 comic books or something like that with the dollar. Did it limit it? Yes, in some ways, because there were some things, like, for example, I have some Thor comic books, a couple of Daredevil, for example, a few Conan that I picked up and so forth. But those were kind of, actually, I could not continue to buy series of all those things and be able to kind of spread out some of the things that I wanted, like Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen comic books, and some of the other ones, I used to like to buy Brave and the Bold, for example, when it was a character I liked, or Showcase if it was something new that interested me, and I've showed some of those on my channel as well. But you couldn't really, because I know, and every month I didn't necessarily have the dollar every month, I might have only had 50 cents or something like that.
Yeah, no,
so that definitely limited what I could buy.
I was curious because, and I can't remember who said it, but I've heard stories of people saying, I had a dime. I could either buy a book with one character in it, or I could buy Justice League that had a bunch of characters. So it was almost like a bonus buy.
And that's true. And I will tell you that I gravitated towards the books, with some exceptions, but I gravitated towards the books that had multiple characters. In fact, I have that series, which is a little bit on hiatus because I'm doing that Battle of the Values of the 1960s. But that thing about the comics my mom let me keep, where I just have the comics that I actually brought with me through life, basically. And when I had to make a decision as to what comics I was going to get rid of, I actually gravitated towards the comics with multiple characters. Not all of them, but most of them that I have are ones with multiple characters. And I remember looking at them and actually keeping, it's funny, some things feel like that you remember. It's really weird, even though it's like 60 years ago. I remember looking at the comic books and picking up The Wedding of Aquaman, Tamira, thinking I didn't care much about that comic book, but the cover was great because it had all the characters attending the wedding. So I said, I guess I'll keep this one. So, it had nothing to do with value or first appearance or anything like that. other than like some of the Brave and the Bold and some of the showcase comic books were things that were kind of interesting to me because there were new characters or characters being showing for the first time in the Silver Age, things like that. So those I kind of kept too. But otherwise, it was just like, hey, this is a cool comic book for whatever reason. Not that, hey, if I had kept that Flash of Two Worlds in pristine condition, it would be worth like, $45,000 today or something like that.
Oh, of course.
We never thought about anything like that.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah. It's funny. The first time I submitted to CGC through Midtown, I was running out to a signing, and I just, I knew I was sending some stuff, and I just grabbed literally a bunch of stuff, and some of it included from when I was younger. And the very first Deadpool ongoing, which of course is nothing compared to some of the books you're talking about, was a book I poured over and read and read and read when I was in high school, not thinking, let me actually check to see the condition of the book. And it came back as like a 5.5. But I look at it like, well, one, I have to learn to look at them better when before I submit them, to consider them better, I should say. And two, it's just a sign that this was a well-read and well-loved and enjoyed book.
Right. Exactly.
Now, you took a long break there, college to 2007. I'm kind of surprised that anything in between kind of get you to poke your head up, like, for example, like the death of Superman, anything like that.
No, I have to admit, I didn't even know that it happened.
Wow.
I really didn't know it happened. I mean, I found out later on, obviously. You got to remember now, I between going to college, getting a master's degree as a remedial reading teacher, doing that type of work, then going to law school at night, then taking the bar exam, and then immediately thereafter getting married, doing what you do when you get married, starting a new career, then changing to another career, to another job, then having children, getting involved with soccer and little league and the rest of this type of basketball and the rest of this type of stuff. In 2007, my kids were getting a little bit older, and essentially I had a little bit more time, although I was involved in Boy Scouts with my son quite a bit. And my daughter was a basketball player. So I was the away team, the away game guy. I went to all the away games. And so that takes up time. And, the job I had was not an easy job. It takes a lot of time. My hours were long. And when you got home at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, you had something to eat, talk to your wife a little bit, maybe watched a little TV or something like that. And then went to bed because I would get up at 5 a.m. the next morning.
Yeah. So you were pretty busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was kind of, I thought it was kind of interesting. You said that when you came back to it in 2007, you picked up Avengers, you picked up X-Men, and it was just like a world of confusion. I guess that kind of gives some credence to, you tell me, do you feel that gives credence to Marvel basically starting a new volume almost every year now, saying, oh, this is an excellent jumping on point for new readers?
It could be. It's a little annoying to me that they do this. But I mean, Spider-Man, I've kind of stuck with Spider-Man a bit, although there was a big period of time after Spider-Man number 55 where I still bought one of the comics, or like the A cover or something like that, but I never read it because I just didn't like what was going on. So with the new volume, I have bought all of them. I haven't sat down to read them yet. I'm going to wait until I think they're up to number 11 now. I think I just bought number 11. When they get to number 12, I'm going to sit down and read through all 12 and make a decision as to whether I'm going to stick with it or not. I think that's the thing, and with the now that you can read some of the stuff online, in DC Universe has now got their Ultimate Edition, so you don't have to wait 6 months. Pretty Fly just signed up for it. He asked me if I was going to do it. I said, I'm thinking yes, but I haven't done it yet. I haven't pulled the trigger. There's a lot of comic books that I would like to read, but I didn't buy them only because, it's just a lot of money to spend on this type of stuff. And I'd rather go back and try to fill in my volume 1 run of Justice League of America, I just finished my Blue Beetle, the first volume of the Blue Beetle, DC Blue Beetle thing. Those are the type of things that I like. Maybe nobody else likes them, but I like them. So I'd rather look into those things. Like when I went to New York Comic Con, I was able to fill in a lot of the Justice League of America Volume 1 that I was missing. And I found the 2 Blue Beetles, and I found some other stuff that I thought was pretty cool. And to me, that digging and looking for those type of things is, at this point in my collecting career, is a lot more fun than just accumulating more books just because I want to read the story.
Yeah,
so I
that's
think
half
going,
the game.
Yeah, I think going, electronic or to me is probably the way to go.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about that too, especially with DC's announcement. Now it's just a 30-day gap.
Right.
But in my mind, it's like, well, I could focus on the things I honestly want to collect. Like Wolverine, for example. I've always collected Wolverine, and that's something I think that's always going to be in my pulse. But now if I am interested in saying, oh, let's see what's going on with what's going on with Iron Man, I don't have to worry about which cover you're going to get, when it's going to come out. It's just there. And I don't have to worry about where to store it either.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we'll do is we're going to start with our questions. And my wife.
I saw a lot of questions. there. You're going to go up to the top again?
Yeah, I have to go all the way back up. But first, I have to go with my wife, of course, because she's my wife. So she goes first. In your opinion, how have comics changed? And do you prefer older comics over new?
Is she talking about the odor and the smell, or is she talking about the content?
I'm going to say content because she hasn't flipped through enough older ones to get that distinct smell.
Okay. That's a good question. I know that Matt Woods disagrees with me to some extent, so I'm going to try to couch this answer in the best possible way. I grew up with comic books in the 1960s, and a lot of the DC stuff was kind of silly stuff in some ways when you look back at it now. It just was their routine, and Superman was still the top-selling comic book, and that type of stuff. So they had what they thought was a winner. When Justice League came out, it was like the top-selling comic book, but it was formulaic. If you look at what they did, it was pretty formulaic. The storylines today are really good, but I would say going back to the Stan Lee stories, and whether or not Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko co-plotted or wrote some of it, just them,
Mm-hmm.
Those stories to this day stand up so well, and I have to say I like them better than many of today's stories. And part of the reason is I think that the stories just flowed so much better in those old days, and you saw things happening more visually. Now, when I sit down and I'm reading all these boxes of words, I'm not even looking at the artwork. I mean, I'm really not. I have to really stop and step back and look and say, okay, what does this look like? Because on one page, there could be like 20 boxes of stream of consciousness of the character or something like that. I mean, it's no more word balloons or thought balloons, basically. It's boxes. But there's so many of them. I mean, I feel like I'm reading a short story. And to me, that takes away from the essence of what a comic book is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a marriage of art and words, not, oh, here are the words, great story. Hey, the art is pretty good here. It's really nice. It's almost like it's two separate things. I know it's not, but it's almost like it's two separate things. And that's one thing that I'll read them, I'll look at them, but I find them to be a bit more difficult. The other thing is that I think was better in the olden days than the new days is that now you've got these, and I'm not saying the stories are bad, but you have these writers now that set up these comic book stories. So there might be 3 different things happening at once. All right. And so you may have something happening today, then a throwback to what was happening in the past that they're actually conferring about or arguing about or whatever about today. And then you have like a third part where there's something in between happening. And if the artist doesn't do a good job of distinguishing these things, and in some instances, I find it confusing.
I hear you.
You know,
Yeah.
and so to me, I don't like that either, and that happens a lot nowadays. It didn't happen before. You would have different scenes and parts and whatever else, but you knew that you were going to something else, and you could tell what was happening. And now, especially sometimes with the artists, they have these things that go across down the bottom. And I mean, so I'm looking at it. I have to say, there were times when I'm looking at something and I'm trying to figure out which panel to go to next.
Yeah, yeah, that drives me crazy too, especially when you make the conversion to digital. You know, because I know that I don't know about the DC app. I don't have any experience with that yet, but I know that Marvel had that view where it just focuses on one panel. So it'll shoot to the next one, but you may need a reference from the prior one. And it's thrown me off a couple times too.
Right.
But I have to say, it's funny that you were saying with the various word boxes and everything, because when I really started getting heavy into comics in the 90s, you know, Uncanny X-Men was my big thing. And I just remember the Scott Lobel era where it was box after box after box after box in the panel. I mean, it would take you a half hour to finish one book. And now, fast forward, I felt like certain writers, like Bendis, for example, in Ultimate Spider-Man, he had done a couple of issues, and I've talked about this before, where they were just doing some like note passing in a classroom, like that was the whole book, and I felt like it was over like in 5 minutes. But I mean, the first time I thought it was done well. Then I think he kind of did it one too many times for my liking. But
well, I would tell you, like in the older books, you know, for example, someone like Jack Kirby could do a splash panel that was just fantastic, and I know he would outline these things out, and then Lee would go back and write in the dialogue and stuff like that. But he would build up to these things, and you'd see it building up to it. Not that it doesn't happen today, but it just seems that people are more. I don't know. I just don't think that they are catering to the reader and to the essence of what a comic book is supposed to be, as they did. And I know I'm speaking generally. I know it's not everyone, you know, and so forth. But that's just the overall impression that I get, you know. And it's something that I don't really care for, you know. And I think in some ways, that's why I'm kind of starting to go away from newer comic books. Now, Pretty Far says, "Hey, you're reading this? You're reading this?" And no, I'm not. It might be really good. And I think now with DC Ultimate, I could sit down and read through it, you know. But you know, I'm not going to go out and buy these things because to me, it's not the same. I'd rather go back and find some stuff that I would like to get.
Now, just out of curiosity, does that what are your feelings on like these big events that go on in comics that span different titles and countless issues and tie-ins?
Well, when I first got back into comic books in 2007, I had the completest attitude, right? So I didn't care if they had a special, unique cover that cost $200. I would get it so that I would have them all.
Well,
and I'd say about 3 years ago, you know, and you could see I have actually it's my most watched video was 5 comic book collecting mistakes. All right. And I went through and and someone, I remember the comment saying, "You should have said my 5." I said, "Yeah, well, maybe." I said, but I figured other people might do the same mistakes, right? So these were mistakes that I figured that I was doing. And so I corrected just pretty much all of them um, to different varying degrees. I know there's more work I can do on a few of the things that are there, but one of them was this whole completist type of thing and the fact that I don't have to do that. So now what happened was when you have one of these things, like you have a storyline, you know, that's in a particular book, maybe runs for 5 or 6 issues. And then you have all these other, you know, books that somehow tie into it, you know, I would get them all. You know, when there was a Civil War, I told this story before, I was buying every single one. And then something terrible happened, Phil. She-Hulk, number 8. I could not find the first edition anywhere. I had to settle for the second printing. That damn thing bothered me like crazy for the longest time. This shows you how far gone I was and that I needed therapy. So I started searching for it, like on eBay and so forth. And then I found the guy that was selling numbers 1 through 10 for whatever it was. Bought it. Because then now I took out that, first printing, put it in there, put the second printing with the 10, and it's somewhere in my collection. I don't know where it is because I don't care about those. But I wanted that. And that's sick. I mean, it really is sick in some ways, and so I stopped doing that. So if I saw a storyline, like one of these, like Deceased Dead Planet or one of these things like that maybe runs 5 or 6 issues, I'll just buy that because that's the story.
Yeah.
You're missing some tangents. I don't care. That's the story. And if I find the story worth reading so that I'm going to buy the issues, that's all I really need to buy. I don't need to buy the other 10 or 15 that tie into it.
I got to say, I thought you were going to go a totally different direction
with
that She-Hulk example. Yeah, I think it was either during Civil War or maybe during Dark Reign. I ran into something where I feel like it was an issue of Civil War where they had those, in Civil War, remember they had those very distinctive covers. So you knew it was part of the story.
Right.
And I think the most that they really even got into the story was the characters at one point said something like, "Oh, did you hear what's happening over there?" Like, "Oh yeah, but let's get back to our story." It's like, oh, okay, then we don't need to go into all these here. But I've been neglecting the chat. I'm sorry, guys. So let me go back here. And I found our first question from Brian LCS. Joe, who's your favorite Marvel hero?
Spider-Man.
Easy.
I mean, I've got all of those that I collected as a kid, and I've told that story before on my channel, on the Comics Mom Let Me Keep. I love the kind of the original Spider-Man, and just the whole storylines and things that happened to him and how he had to struggle through so many different things. To me, was fantastic. I'm a little partial in the Silver Age to Captain America as well, from a Marvel standpoint. But Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man was my favorite book. And the one thing that I lament is that I found out about Spider-Man with issue number 9.
Oh.
And then I went searching in the used bookstores because they carried like used comic books to see if I could find the earlier ones. And the other one I could find was number 5. So I don't have any of the other ones, other than number 5, lower than number 9. So that kind of I lament to this day, but that's the way it goes.
Well, maybe you'll get lucky like Matt Woods and find one at a garage
for 50
sale.
cents. Yeah, I know.
Okay, Master and Madam Blaster. I think it's actually from Master. Any war, Western, or horror comics for young Joe and John?
Yeah, I mean, horror comics, there was like Tales of the Unexpected, things like that. I have a bunch of them in my collection. We'd buy them now and then. It was kind of like this looks like an interesting one, and we buy it. Westerns, not so much for me. But war, yeah, a ton of war. I loved Sergeant Rock, for DC. And you have to remember, and I'm sorry, I'm probably repeating myself on some things I've said before. But,
no worries.
But you have to remember, 1960, the early 1960s, World War II was just 15 to 20 years before it had ended. So, I mean, I was born after the war, but, my parents, my uncles, my aunts, other people that were like of the generation before all lived through the Second World War. And so, and the people that wrote those comic books probably lived through it as well. So they were very poignant. There were some great things that were going on. And there were others too, that were part of the DC thing. I did read some Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, but the DC war comics of that era were just really, really tremendous. I'm trying to remember the title of it now, but there was one, Weird War Stories or something like that.
Yeah.
Was that it? It combined science fiction with kind of World War II type of stories. Very, very interesting to me because I was a science fiction nut. Love science fiction. I read like science fiction books like crazy. So to me, that was like a great marriage. Although it was was unreal compared to the Sergeant Rocks and the Jeb Stewart and stuff like that. It was just really good. So from my standpoint.
Yeah. No, and the only reason I knew that one right off the top of my head, I was at an estate sale on Sunday. I'd never been to one, and they happen to have a couple really ratty issues of Weird War, and it was the type of thing. I was like, wow, this does look interesting because he had UFOs and
Right.
tanks in at the same time. Let's see what else we have here. Matt is just shocked. He was unaware that Superman had died. I think he's died a couple times now at this point, but he gets better. And I just went forward here on the chat. Hold on. Was Ringo the Blue Beetle or was it Paul? Very funny. Let's see. Comic Journey's here. Let's see. Okay. Sleepy is here. Hi, guys. Cole is here. Trying to catch up with some questions here. There was a nice little robust chat. Oh, here we go. Psychedelic. Paul, do you prefer the older stories of like Batman, or do you also like the Frank Miller's Dark Knight?
Yeah, they're very different. When you say older stories of Batman, I mean going back to some of the stuff in the 60s, they were trying to marry like science fiction and Batman, which didn't work. It's really kind of around Batman, an upcoming video that I have, which I think just uploaded. I'm not sure when it's going to show, when I scheduled it for, but somebody asked me what would be if I want to collect Neil Adams Batman covers, which one would I collect? And so I go through the 10 that I would collect. I have many of them. I don't have them all, but I went through all of the covers I could find and picked the 10 that I would suggest. And I think it's number 217, where I think it's I'm trying to remember now, guys, but I think it's the one where Dick Grayson goes to college, and Batman closes down the Batcave, moves to a penthouse or something, in the Wayne Foundation. And so he lives in there. And he says, I'm going to become like the old Batman and put fear in the hearts of evildoers. And the thing is, I think that was kind of like the beginning. And this is Neil Adams, God, I forgot the name of the author. Jeez. Denny O'Neil, I think it was. Pretty sure.
I think so.
And they just started like going down that road of the Batman stories that were really, really good. With Ra's al Ghul and the rest of them, that are in there, bringing the Joker back in as the maniacal type of character and the rest of this. Those are really good stories. Now, Frank Miller's Dark Knight, I think, was terrific, but it's different. I have to say, I had to read it a couple of times. The first time I read it, I wasn't sure I liked it. So I put it aside, I picked it up and I read it again, in a trade, right? I read it again and I liked it. And I kind of saw what was happening. The first time, it didn't quite hit me. But the second time I saw what he was trying to get across and how it was working. And I think it's a great story.
And do you think, that's actually interesting, do you think that they could go back to, if they wanted to, a more lighthearted Batman? I feel like every run since then has just been in that same kind of vein.
Well, I don't see that for Batman. Paul Levitz, who was the president at one point, I mean, he wrote a lot of stuff too, but he ended up being the president of DC for a while, gave a talk a few years ago in Manhattan. And so I decided to go down there to listen to him speak. And then he took some questions. And it's funny because and the guy knows more about stuff than I do, right? But I have a certain way that I see Batman and I see Superman. And I'll argue till I'm blue in the face that I'm right. he saw it differently. And so I'm getting up there and I'm trying to, I couldn't take a lot of time at the microphone, but I tried to explain to him why I thought that he was potentially wrong. You know, people were like aghast there like that. But see, Batman, I think Batman is the true person and was born when his parents were killed. And that Bruce Wayne is simply the facade. But I think it's the reverse for Superman. Superman, baby, raised by the Kents, you know, Midwestern goodness and all that type of stuff like that. That's the real person. Superman is who he puts on to help people. So if Batman was born when Bruce was whatever he was, 6, 8, 10, whatever heck years, however it was, that's something that's been with him for a long time. I mean, so I think the reality is when they had kind of silly Batman, you know, whatever else, even some of those, you know, comics from the 50s and 60s, there still was a story behind it, but I think it's so much better, you know, now with the stories that they have, you know, about Batman, because he's the best stories are when Batman is the true detective, you know.
Yeah.
And so if they have, when he's a true detective and he's solving something, those are the ones that I love. I think those are the best ones. I mean, he could beat people up and stuff too. That's fine. And have his wonderful toys. That's fine. Mm-hmm. But figuring things out and coming up with the resolution or the solution, to me, that's what he's all about.
So let me ask you along those same lines too. First, just an observation, actually. It's like your Superman argument is the reverse of Kill Bill. That whole soliloquy that what's the name, David Carradine has towards the end of the second film, and that's an interesting take too. But with going back to Batman, then what is your quintessential Batman run at this point?
I don't know that I can answer that question. I mean, I just like going back to Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. I think, you know, bringing back Two-Face. I guess they did the Riddler also in the Silver Age. You know, bringing those characters back, but differently than how they were portrayed in the Golden Age, and having Batman dealing with them. To me, a lot of that still exists today. I mean, that's really the characters. Even Batman is not entirely different than the way he was portrayed back then. I think that was the birth of the new Batman, you know, and Batman Begins, the movie, even Batman 89. I think it's all based on that run. That's kind of the way I see it. So to me, that's the best one.
Let's see. Main Event has a good question here. If you were in charge of picking one single issue that represents the best of comics to bury in a time capsule to be opened in 5,000 years, which issue would it be and why? And of course, I guess you're going to have that bagged and boarded properly for it to last for 5,000 years. It's obviously not a Marvel book because that paper's not lasting more than 5 years.
I mean, is he talking about a new comic book or just any comic book?
He didn't specify, so I'm going to go with any.
Well, I mean, people see me as a DC guy, right? So I could say something like, you know, Action Comics #1 or whatever, but to me, I really think that Spider-Man, in many ways, articulated what modern comic books are supposed to be or what they should be like. I mean, Fantastic Four as well. You know, Avengers, X-Men, I don't know, but those two, I think, were critical. Someone once asked me, did you ever own Amazing Fantasy #15? My answer was immediately no. Now, if I had thrown that out when I had to get rid of comics, I would just shoot myself now. So I think that if I had to pick one, I don't see Spider-Man ever going downhill. I don't see Batman ever going downhill. So Detective 27, for example. I don't see Superman going downhill. So whether you want to say Action 1 or Superman 1 or whatever, I think any one of those comics, I mean, it's just, I mean, look at what they're selling for now. I mean, they would just keep on going up in value. And there's no doubt about it in my mind. So if we're talking about value, I'd pick any one of those three characters and either their first comic by name or where they first appeared. I'd take one of them.
Sleepy Reader actually had a good comment here. He would put an issue of the Spirit in that capsule from the Warren series.
Yeah.
I don't know that the Spirit, I mean, to be honest with you, I was totally unaware of the Spirit until the god-awful Frank Miller movie. So I don't know that the Spirit's going to resonate, 5,000 years from now, let alone 3 years from now.
Hey, if I would pick a favorite, I'd get Booster Gold and put Booster Gold #1 in there. But you know what? That's people are going to pick it up and say, "Who the hell is that?"
Hey, you never know. With his time travel and everything, he might be the it man of that time.
maybe.
Trev has a good suggestion. Actually, Kingdom Come. I've heard actually a lot of people revisit that. Yeah,
that's a great story. I got it in a trade. I mean, the artwork is fantastic. I hear Reggie always saying when he first got through, it was hard for him to get through. It's very cerebral, and I understand that. I think when I did it, it was kind of similar. I read through it relatively quickly, and I said, okay, there's something going on here, and I can't read this like a regular comic book. So I went back and read it slowly, went through it, took a look at it, looked at the pages, read the story again, tried to understand what was happening, with respect to that. And there are a few, like some of the Alan Moore stuff is kind of like that as well, Yeah. So I think there are some that are really cerebral and you really got to just, Watchmen, right?
Yeah.
You got to be able to kind of sit down there. Watchmen was the same way because it had the story within the story, the kid reading the book about so that when I first read through that stuff, I'm going, wow, there's a lot going on here. And at the end, I didn't quite understand what happened. So again, I had to go back and read through it again. But those are tremendous stories. And they are written in a true comic book style, as opposed to all the boxes around the place. So if you're kind of a casual comic book reader, or you just like, I don't know, to look at the pictures, I don't know what to say, but those are probably not books for you. But if you sit down with some of these that are looked at as real classic stories, you really got to sit down with them and reread them once, twice, maybe 3 times, maybe more. I mean, Kingdom Come, I've probably read that about 5 times now, because and Watchmen the same way, because every now and then I say, you know what, let me pull it down from there and let me just read through it again, because it's that type of story where you can read it again. If you haven't read it in a few years, it's almost like reading it, you kind of know the story, but you don't remember everything else that happens directly, just generally how the storyline works. And you get kind of that, kind of very positive reaction and feeling about it. Again, you put it down and say, boy, that was really good.
Yeah, you know what it is? I picked up Watchmen for the first time probably, I'm going to say about 5 years before the film. And it was the same thing. It was like, it was very dense. It wasn't something you could read in passing. It was something you had to seriously sit down and study and pore over. And then I remember reading it a second time right before the film, just to kind of refresh it. And then I remember after I watched the movie, I kind of was like, okay, Alan Moore's a bit of a kook, but I can understand what he was saying, because you do, in my opinion at least, lose something in translation. You're no longer engaging your imagination as you're flipping through it.
Well, what I do with those books actually is I put them by my bed. And what I'll do is purposely, like, maybe go to bed a little earlier than I would. And because I mean, I don't know about you, but I can't read through all of that at once. I just can't.
No.
So I'll read like Watchmen. I'll read maybe 2 issues, something like that, and I'll read it over the space of 5 days or something like that. And I'll just read them at night before I turn off the light and go to sleep. And that's the way I do it.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, did you watch the HBO series that was out a couple of years ago?
Yes, yeah, I enjoyed that. Thought it was
Yeah,
good.
I thought it was a good successor to it.
Yeah.
Psychedelic had a suggestion. What about the Spidey book where he needed to get medicine to Aunt May?
That's my
Aunt May,
favorite.
yeah.
That's my favorite. I think I mentioned that at one point in time, because he's sitting there. I mean, it's funny when you look at Key Collector, it says he develops a new power, which I guess is like super duper strength or something like that. But to me, and I think I might have mentioned this on the 1011. I forget when I mentioned this type of thing. But to me, that was my favorite Spider-Man book of that time because it was about family, and it was about his Aunt May, who is everything to him. And he's sitting there, and it would have been very easy to give up, you know, but he knew not just for himself, but he knew that he was his Aunt May's only hope. And so he gathered all of his inner strength, mental strength, and all of that, and was able to get out of there. So, I mean, that's my favorite Spidey of that era.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, that's when Spider-Man really rang true. That was when you could say, okay, this is a relatable character now. He's not, yeah, his biggest battle is not fighting Dr. Octopus. It's,
Right.
helping his aunt. Okay, I'm waiting to see if there's any more questions in the chat. In the meantime, let me ask. We've talked a lot about past writers and past artists. Are there any current day writers or artists or creative teams that you follow or that you enjoy?
I don't really follow any of them, to be honest with you. I was reading some of the Batman, Scott Snyder stuff, which I thought was okay. The some of the Spider-Man stuff, because I was just buying them. I was buying Batman for a while and Detective, but that whole like marriage thing, when they didn't get married, actually, I was hoping he'd get married.
Hmm.
I thought it'd be a good storyline and bring up like all new type of stuff. And when it didn't happen, it just pissed me off.
A lot of people have that sentiment. Yeah.
Buying it. Um, uh, I just thought it'd bring all new stories. I mean, just think of the different directions they could have went with that, and they could have gotten divorced or something later on. I don't care. I know that stuff happens. I mean, like if Spider-Man can get reboot, magically and not even know Mary Jane anymore, and so forth, they could do something like that as well. But but I can't say that. I would say what I do now more so is, and it comes from that show that I had when I used to pick the top covers for the week. There are a number of comic book cover artists that I really like. And so I will actually still buy. I don't buy like I used to, but there are times like Delotto or one of these other people, especially the Italians and some of the Spanish ones that are just. I mean, I've said this before. I think that if they were artists back in the Middle Ages, they would be, the basically the artist for the king, and when you see like Goya and Velázquez for the Spanish ones and so forth, where they are painting the paintings of the kings and the princes and the lords, that's what they would be doing. I mean, I think they're that good. So occasionally you'll see, something like a Spider-Man or something like that, and it just floors me with how great they are. And there are others that I like as well, and I'll pick up every now and then. But those guys are just fantastic, just fantastic.
Yeah. So I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, but why don't you tell us about some of the shows you have coming up?
Okay, what's today, Monday? So I'm basically going on trying to put out like one show a week. It was funny when I got rid of that weekly cover show. That used to take a lot of time.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
Research, put together, and all that. But there were other things I wanted to do, like this whole thing with the 1960s and so forth, and the value. And I have some others in mind. I have a couple of other things that I really would like to do, but I'm probably not going to do it until next year. And so I do have coming up this Wednesday, DC versus Marvel, the Battle of the Comic Book Values for 1965, which, if you remember, like for 64, Marvel swept the top 10. See what happens for 65. 66 is almost done, so that'll probably come out in a few weeks. But next week, I'm going to have that Neil Adams definitive Batman cover collection thing. You're responding to my friend. That'll be on.
Definitely want to catch that. Yeah.
Then probably after that, we'll probably have an espresso mail call, because I got something really good in the mail, something really, really good. And so I want to show it off. But going to have to wait a few weeks until that show comes up at that point.
Interesting enough, I think that's actually how I first found your channel, not through the comics, but the espresso mail call, because we had just moved into this
wait
house.
a minute. So, say after me. Espresso. S-E-S-S. Espresso, not espresso. Espresso with an S, 2 S's. Espresso.
Yeah, well, I'll set it up. We had just moved into this house, or no, I'm sorry. We had just converted to natural gas, with a whole big story with that. And I wanted a mocha pot. I got one. And I was driving my wife crazy with it. It was like, no, you can't clean it like you normally would. You can't do this. And then the idiots who converted our stove, they didn't calibrate it right. So I had it, I had the heat.
You burned the handle.
Low. Oh, yeah, it melted right off. And I mean, look, shout out to Amazon, not sponsored, for just being like, yeah, here's another one for free. But I had that pot on. I remember my wife saying, come on, nobody I know uses that. And I was like, YouTube, look, this guy uses it. Let's watch this.
Well, here's the key. Here's the key, Phil. You never put it in the middle. You push it off to the side so the handle is as far away, whether it's an electric or gas. You put it so it's nowhere near that, because it'll still percolate. It'll come up even if it's only half of that flame is on it. It'll work.
Yeah, and there's just something magical when you hear that percolation, that it's already,
when it comes up right away.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
It's ready.
And it's just so much smoother.
Right. It is. It's good.
Comic Book Crowd is coming back. I'm excited about that.
That's right. We have one coming back on the 28th, I guess, is the Friday. And we're going to be talking about She-Hulk, but we're going to also go through is it 8 now? I think it's 8. Disney Plus Marvel shows. And we're going to talk about what our favorites are and which ones we don't care too much about. So that should be pretty cool, because I know we're going to have differences of opinion there. And Don, Solid 2 Kings, is going to be on the show as a guest.
Wow.
That's going to be kind of cool.
Yeah. And
we're anxious to have him on there. And I think he's anxious to be on as well. So that'll be at 9 p.m. Eastern time on Friday the 28th. So it'll be a week from this Friday.
Yeah, and that's just a great collaborative show. You've got a great crew working with you there.
Yeah.
So let's see. I'm just making sure there's any other questions here. No questions, but I think Matt has a nice sentiment here. Joe is one of the most thoughtful creators on YouTube. That is why his channel is so good.
That's because I pay him. He gets a check every week for me to keep saying those things.
I was going to say, Matt is writing like YouTube Hallmark cards lately in the comments, and it's just great. Well, Joe, with that, you've successfully completed the 7-minute challenge.
Thank you.
And I thank you for coming on and sharing your time with us. Yeah, your channel is very, very unique, and I always enjoy your unique perspectives, really on everything. I've said this to you before in the comments, and I'm going to say this again, especially these DC Marvel value battles. I feel like you need to write a book about these things. But I think you have your plate full already from how it sounds.
That's right. I'm going to be going away on a Mediterranean cruise with my wife for a couple of weeks as well. So I'll probably have stuff that'll be, scheduled to come out at that point, because those are the 4 things I'm talking about. But we're going to be leaving in a few weeks as well to do that. So it's going to be kind of cool to do. But the thing is, I'm doing this because it's fun to do. I enjoy doing it. Some of it takes more time than others. So I get up, I work on it for half a day. Then in the afternoon, I do whatever my wife tells me I got to do. That's kind of my routine pretty much in retirement right now. So to me, it's, as long as it's fun, we keep doing it. And I enjoy doing the research and doing that. And then you're very kind, to say those things, and I really appreciate it.
Well, I mean it, and I appreciate what you offer on your channel.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you. And I had a really great time. This was really fantastic. And notwithstanding Bruno trying to hone in on the whole thing, I think, it was just great. I love talking about things that I remember. You said that once before, the Egyptian comic book. If they selling it at the Sphinx or the pyramid, then maybe yes.
You never know.
But I'm not going to go into Alexandria looking for a comic book. I don't think so.
If you do, you have to record that.
That's right. That's right.
Matt actually brought up something, and I've had a burning question. Maybe it's something I may have missed. Where did you get the title Anachronic Comics?
Okay. Well, Matt, I think, and some others know that have worked with me that I like alliteration, right? And so I got a piece of paper. I started writing down what goes with comics, and I started putting all different things down. I found a couple I thought were really fantastic, and I did a search, and they were being used already. So then I said to myself, okay, let me think about something like that. And I was thinking about some things that, back in the 1960s, like we talked about Weird War, Challenges of the Unknown, for example, other things like that, where you had suddenly a dinosaur, or you had, like weird things happening, where you had kind of a confluence of time periods that kind of meshed together. And there've been shows and movies about that as well. And I happened to just do a search for, words that rhyme with comics or comic or something like that. And anachronic came up. I didn't know what the hell it meant. When I looked it up, I said, oh, wow. It basically means something that's outside of its own space and time. I said, well, that sounds kind of comic booky and scientific, And then I said, okay, so it could be anachronic comic. I like the way that sounded. And so I wondered, I said, so it was funny. I remember Gary B telling me, like, what artist drew your anachronic comic thing? I said, I did it. I drew it. But I started thinking to myself, what can it be? So I started thinking about the Jetsons and the Flintstones, right? They were like two sides of the same coin. And so I said, okay, well, suppose we have something like a Flintstones character, and I only drew a woman because I could draw the big hair with the bone sticking through it. And I said, in a Jetsons type of flying car. And I just drew that, And then I scanned it in, and I used the, paint or some other thing that I had, and I, filled in colors and things like that, and used that. Then the key was, how am I going to start the thing off? And I had all these different things I had done, and I realized, I said, it should be something really short, And so I started thinking about, how about just somebody, I got this little piece of music that you hear in the back, which is kind of like, ooh, ba-da-bum, that's all, And it fit perfectly. And I had the thing moving down. And I said, okay, I need somebody to say Anachronic Comics, but that was too long. So I said, oh, I know, anachronic, and somebody just whispers it. So I asked my wife, could you just whisper anachronic? Now, unlike Reggie, she was able to say the word, but she couldn't get the whisper out, So I don't know. So then I'm talking to my daughter, and she was in medical school at the time. I'm talking to my daughter about something. I said, do me a favor. I said, could you just whisper anachronic, just record it on your phone and send it to me? And she did, but it was too loud. I said, no, you got to whisper it like anachronic, And I showed her the thing that I was going to do, and she kept saying, it's not going to work. I go, it's going to work. So she did it 2 more times. The second time it was perfect. I put it in there. I showed it to her. I said, and she says, you were right. It works, And that was the way the Anachronic Comics start of the video began. I actually, just as to help an artist out, I have an artist who's done a more stylized one for me, and you see that on the banner, But I've used that in different times. I think you used it on the thumbnail for this as well, and that's fine, and that's good to use. But the beginning of each one of my videos is always going to be that original one that I put together, and we're just going to do it like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's funny that you mentioned the Flintstones and the Jetsons, because the first time I saw the logo, that's exactly what I thought. And Matt nailed it too. That movie where they crossed over.
That's right. Exactly. See, I'm not that smart. I just things that I
Hey,
remember.
it works.
That's good.
Well, Joe, thanks again for joining us. We appreciate your
Thank
time.
you.
And chat, thanks again for joining in as well.
Yes, thank you.
Stay tuned. We're going to have another somebody else come up for their 7-minute story in just a couple weeks. And if you want to volunteer, message me. It might not be quick, but we'll figure out exactly when.
It's a lot of fun, guys. So I think you should do it. It's a lot of fun to do.
Yeah. You know, if I could find one of these that's even louder, I think that would even. That was my favorite part, I have to say, of Matt's. It was when I didn't have that, because I would go, Matt, you only got 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Come on, man.
Right.
But thanks again for joining it. And thanks again, everybody. Peace, love, and comics.
Bye. Be well.